You've already seen the unboxing and tour. So let's take a look at old versus new. This is a comparison of the HTC One M7 and the new HTC One M8. So when you're doing a comparison of these two devices, the first thing you do obviously is compare the look, size, feel, all of that stuff, right? We can get into the software stuff later, but if you just look specifically at the size, you can tell that the HTC M8 is a lot bigger than the M7. So M7 on the left, which is the original one, M8 here on the right, and we're only looking at a 5-inch Full HD display on the M8 compared to a 4.7-inch Full HD display on the M7, yet they added a substantial amount of size. So if we line up the bottoms there, you can see how much taller it really is. So it's a tall device. Being 5 inches, it's really one of the bigger phones I've held in quite some time. It's not unmanageable to get around and sort of navigate the phone, but you definitely have to adjust your hand. Sort of do the, we like to call it the shimmy, where you're holding your phone normally like this with the bottom corner in your palm. You sort of have to shimmy up to get to the notification area. It's not something I like to do with most phones, which is why I'm such a big fan of the size of the Moto X, but this phone feels good enough, which I mentioned in my sort of unboxing and initial tour that, it could be something you could get over. Other than the size, actually, let's take a look at the side here. So thickness wise, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would argue they're similar in terms of thickness. The M8 feels a little bit better just because they did such a good job of rounding out this edge over here, whereas with the original one, it sort of ends in this sort of sharp. It's not sharp like it's going to cut you or hurt you, but it's definitely a lot sharper. It doesn't feel quite as unibody as the M8 does. So again, 4.7-inch Full HD display on the M7, 5-inch on the M8. Still have dual boom sound speakers, though you can tell the top grills have been adjusted slightly. So the speaker grill doesn't go quite as far, and with that does not match up on the bottom, which I know can drive some people nuts. But so you do have these speaker grills up top. Sensors have moved, and then you have a 5-megapixel wide-angle camera on the M8 and a 2.1 megapixel wide-angle camera on the M7. So cameras definitely differ there. And then if we do get to the bottom again, you'll notice obviously capacitive touch buttons of back and home on the M7, and then you have on-screen buttons on the M8. And this has sort of been a touchy point around the site. People don't understand why HTC put this giant black bar on the bottom if they didn't need it for buttons. When they went with on-screen, it just added extra sort of thickness and tallness to the device. And I would agree it's unfortunate they did that, but that could have been because they still needed to fit everything inside. They needed that extra amount of space there. So if we turn to the sides, so we've got a SIM tray on the left side, or I guess that's actually the right side. Left side. You got SIM trays on both. Micro SIM in the M7, nano SIM now in the M8. If you look on the right side here, you still have a volume rocker. On each, though, the volume rocker has been changed on the M8 to be a lot easier to push, I would say. This one on the M7 ended up being pretty flush with the device and was oftentimes hard to push. Then above the volume rocker on the M8, you actually do have a micro SD card slot, which holds up to 128 gig SD cards. So you got expandable storage there. There is no expandable storage on the M7. If we look up top, so you've got your power switch on the top left of the M7. On the M8, let's see if we can get this. It's actually up here on the top right. There you go. So you can see it right there on the top right. So they've swapped sides essentially with those. The power lock switch on the M7 actually doubles as an IR blaster, whereas on the M8, they made the whole top an IR blaster. So a little bit different design. Then you have a 3.5mm headphone jack on top of the M7, and you do not have one on top of the M8, which brings us to the bottoms of the device. And you have micro USB chargers on both, and then there is the headphone jack on the bottom of the M8, which I've said plenty of times I am a major fan of. Okay, and if we go to the back side, obviously differences here. So M8, no Beats audio since they HTC sold off the rest of their stake in Beats audio. So no more Beats involved. Does have boom sound obviously on the front side. So no Beats logo. This is obviously the Verizon version, so they branded the hell out of it. But the biggest difference here is up at the cameras. So Single flash on the M7, 4 ultra pixel, or basically a 4 megapixel camera on the back of the M7 as well. You've got the same sensor on the M8, still 4 ultra pixel or megapixel, whatever you want to call it. But we do have a dual flash, and then you also have this secondary depth sensor. So differences here, they took away optical image stabilization in the M8 and in favor of this depth sensor. I'll let you guys decide if you think that was a good idea or not. I'm personally not exactly all that excited about it, but then again, I wasn't all that excited about the 4 ultra pixel camera on the original one, so I was hoping for some sort of upgrade on the second one. I'm not sure that we exactly got that, but those are your differences there. So that's it in terms of hardware design. Now you've got a 2.3 gigahertz quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor in the M8, which is the newest Qualcomm chip. In the M7, you have a Snapdragon 600, which at the time of release was the newest from Qualcomm. 2 gig of RAM in each, and 32 gig of storage in each as well. But again, you have expandable in the M8, whereas you don't have expandable on the M7. So in terms of software, batteries, you have a 2300 milliamp hour in the M7, 2600 milliamp hour in the M8. HTC is bragging that the M8 can do 40% better battery life. We'll test that out and decide if that's actually true or not. So when we load up software, we swipe over here and get the blink feed. So you've got the same sort of icon styles as you had in the past, but you'll see here the on-screen buttons, whereas the M7 has capacitive, so M8 with the on-screen, which gives you the opportunity to swipe up into Google Now. It's also a dedicated multitasking button, whereas on the M7 you have to do double taps and long presses and all sorts of weird gestures in order to get into stuff like that. If we're looking at blink feed though, I wouldn't necessarily say that a lot has changed. Let me get back in there. So I wouldn't say that a lot has changed. You will see some subtle differences in some of the apps. But notifications and things like that all look the same. You can see the accent colors here are green on the M8 and blue on the M7. If we jump in, you can see icon styles have changed in there. And again, those color accents of green instead of blue. And then, this is running KitKat, although I do believe I've updated the M7 to KitKat. Let me just double check that. Yeah, I have. So it's running KitKat as well. It's just running Sense 5 still, so they haven't exactly updated all of that stuff yet. Sorry about the... there we go. So they're both running KitKat. One's just running Sense 6, one's running Sense 5. So those are the differences. Really, UI just has sort of been tweaked slightly. But Sense hasn't necessarily changed all that much other than things like the new gestures. So if we load up, so the M8 with the screen off like this has gestures built in, whereas the M7 doesn't. So you can do a double tap and it will wake your phone. Double tap and it'll go back to sleep. You can swipe from the right and that will unlock to the last spot you're at, I believe. Oh no, that gets you into your widgets. You can swipe to the, you can swipe to the right and that will get you into blink feed. You can, I meant swipe to the left, and you can get into your widgets or your app main home screens. And if I could get this right, swipe up will actually just unlock the device. And then a swipe down actually does voice dialing and voice commands, but you have to have data on for that. Right now I have airplane mode on, so that won't work. So that's changed. And then the other biggest change I would say would be in the cameras. So if we load up cameras in camera software, not necessarily the sensor. So you can see camera software has changed quite a bit, simplified here in the M8. So you just have a shutter button, not the dual shutter and video buttons. If we tap this button, this is how you get into all your different modes, and there's only 6 of them listed there. To get into Zoe's, you actually have to go in this way, whereas on the M7, there's actually a dedicated Zoe button over here on the left. So they've changed the way it works a little bit. It is simpler. I was used to how the M7 works, so I wouldn't necessarily say the M7 is a bad setup. Overall, though, that not a lot's changed. They're still both really fast in terms of shutter speeds when taking pictures. Obviously, you can do some extra editing and features like U-Focus and the new 360 thing that was introduced with the M8 thanks to that dual camera setup, whereas the M7 you can't do that. And you can see sort of how that works in the hands-on video we did. But overall, the design hasn't changed a ton. It is more refined and feels better in your hand, I would say, with the M8. Again, the device is taller though, so you do have to get used to some extra size. And they've upgraded the specs in all the right places, I would say, other than the camera, which so far most people aren't all that impressed with. It takes decent shots, but again, they're 4 megapixel resolution. So if you can live with 4 megapixel shots, that's cool. If you can't, then you can't. So it's kind of a toss up. You need to decide that. But overall, I just want to do this quick comparison to kind of show you guys, the differences in the two. There's not a lot, but they are upgraded in sort of the right spots. Again, newer processor, bigger screen, and the Sense software has been updated, but then again, that update is also coming to the M7. So if you got an M7, you're probably okay sticking there and not necessarily worthy of an upgrade. So if you guys have comments or questions, want to see other sort of comparisons between the two or comparisons of other devices, be sure to give us a shout. We are Droid Life, and we're out. Peace.